Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another episode review for Are You Afraid of the Dark? This episode comes from Season 6. It was directed by Loretta LeBlanc, and it was written by Matthew Cope. And the story is The Tale of the Walking Shadow. Now, I've been dying to get to this episode, if only because I'm a massive Catherine Long fan. If you don't know who Catherine Long is, she played Carly Beth Caldwell in the original 90s Goosebumps show in Haunted Mask 1 and in Haunted Mask 2. And in here, she plays a character named Vanessa. And I remember seeing this episode a while back out of morbid curiosity to see what Catherine Long did in kids' horror outside of Goosebumps or, in maybe similar IPs. And to my knowledge, I think this is the only other kids' horror episode she was ever in. And I have to say, she did a great job in this episode, and I do think that she kind of helps this one. Unfortunately, this one is more of an average Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, in my opinion. There's nothing really too special about it, but it's fun enough. It has a young Jay Baruchel, who is a series staple, especially beginning in Season 6. He was a bit younger in Season 4 and 5. But if you don't know who Jay Baruchel is, he's been in a lot of Seth Rogen movies, and he played in that Sorcerer's Apprentice film with Nicolas Cage from Disney. So if you're familiar with him, and you're familiar with Catherine Long, I definitely recommend to check this out. This is also a haunted play story. It's playing on Macbeth. So if you're familiar with stories like Phantom of the Auditorium from Goosebumps, or some other stories that you'll see in Goosebumps involving a similar idea, or maybe some other stories that you'll see in Are You Afraid of the Dark, and you haven't seen later season Dark episodes, maybe this might be worth a shot. I definitely think this is one of the better Season 6 episodes. This is definitely not a bad one at all. So yeah, let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So like all Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes, the Midnight Society kicks off the story by giving you kind of like a cold open where they all gather around in the forest, get around their campfire, and whoever's turn it is to share the story, they share it. So the story starts off, once the narrator begins, in kind of a weird fashion. There's a woman, I think, loading in props onto a stage, and you see outside beforehand that there's a high school production of Macbeth, also known as a Scottish play. And if you're not familiar with Macbeth, Macbeth is essentially a cursed play, and you never are supposed to say the name of it, especially when you're producing or performing in it. So you always refer to it as the Scottish play until the production is over. So a woman's loading in props, and she thinks she sees somebody, and it turns out a sword falls from the ceiling and pierces through a glove, which looks kind of ominous. It sets the mood that something's not right with this theater. And the story begins from that point in a narration, which, is common in older seasons of Dark, but it is kind of around in some episodes in some later seasons. And in this one, there is some mild narration to kind of catch you up to speed of the two main characters, who are Ross and Vanessa. Now, Ross and Vanessa are basically playing the two main characters in the play of Macbeth. And Ross, played by Jay Baruchel, has this crush on Vanessa, who's played by Catherine Long. And he doesn't really want to say no to her because she has some pull with one of her good friends who's directing the episode. I mean, not the episode, but the play. And he wants to, kind of impress her. So he's taking the lead role, and hopefully he gets to spend some time with her, practicing, Macbeth and all that. And she's really excited for this production, and he's apprehensive about it, of course. And as the story goes along, there's another woman character that comes in, and I think her name is Hermione. Hermione's this older woman that is there to kind of help the local high school with the production, because I think the theater is in town and they're putting it on at the local theater. She's trying to help get things underway. But everybody seems to think that the theater that they're performing in is haunted, and that there is some other being, possibly trying to do something sinister. And Ross hears the superstition, and kind of gets freaked out by it at first when Hermione kind of shares some backstory about the play of Macbeth and all that. And when he stumbles out, away from her and Vanessa, he finds like this cauldron prop, and he looks inside and sees this ghost. And he starts to believe that maybe there is something supernatural about this play, and there's, he can't put his finger on it, but something is definitely off. And he kind of puts that in the back of his mind. And a lot of this episode is just them hanging out, essentially. I'm just going to kind of skim over the surface on this stuff. So, like, Vanessa and her friend will be chilling at, like, a cafe or something, and he crashes and says, "What's up?" It's kind of small scale when it comes to that. And eventually, there comes a point in the story after, Ross kind of, I think he might allude to what has happened to him. And he's talking with this older woman when he's trying to find this woman, Hermione, from earlier, to kind of confront her about, like, is the theater really haunted and all that. But this older woman from the cold open kind of reveals that there is a ghost. And there's no more mystery at the midpoint of the episode, because she essentially pulls out this old poster that shows this ghost of this man that he saw in the cauldron. And the ghost, apparently, that he's been interacting with is Hermione herself, who apparently was like this guy's wife, and they died, years apart. But the gentleman that he's been seeing died in the production when it was, first put out 50 years prior. And because he died, the theater hasn't dared to put on a production of it for like 50 years. So this is the first time they're doing it. And she seems to think that because they're putting it on, that he's come back for unfinished business. So Ross, armed with this information, decides to try to confront Vanessa about it and says, "Hey, look, I'm out of the play. All this weird stuff is happening, and I feel like you need to know the truth." But Vanessa feels kind of hurt by that, and she walks off, and he feels like he was wronged her. So at a rehearsal, he's decided to, make his reappearance and say, "Hey, look, I'm back on the play. I've changed my mind." And he never showed Vanessa the poster that he saw, kind of proving that this play theater is haunted and that maybe putting on this play is a bad idea. Which culminates in them doing a rehearsal where he's in costume and they're performing the play out. And at one point, the guy who died years ago makes a reappearance on the stage and wants to play the role of Macbeth. And he looks over to Hermione, and Hermione's like, "Just let him finish. This is why we're here. Just let him do his thing." And he's like, "All right, let's play it out." And they kind of have like a sword fight on stage. They finish the play, and the ghost gets his unfinished business done, and kind of learn of what happens to him and Hermione and what happens to their spirits and all that. And then the story just kind of ends. Yeah, might be kind of spoilerish for that one, but there's not a lot to this story. And that's essentially what you're going to expect out of the tale of the Walking Shadow. Okay, so minus the outro with the Midnight Society closing out the episode, this one just doesn't have a lot going for it, in my opinion, but there is a lot to praise about it, surprisingly. And I'm going to start off with this. The sound score of this episode seems kind of notable. It feels like a throwback to A Night in Terror Tower from Goosebumps, the 2-part episode. I think this is one of the best sound scores I've come across in Dark. Even though it sounds more run-of-the-mill, there is this medieval twang, and it does help create this ambiance to it, which I can appreciate. The small town that they're in, it does have a bigger scope than some of these other shows that I've seen in the kids' horror genre. You do have, wandering sets. You have like a play theater. You have a cafe. So the story does jump around. You get to see the behind the theater, in front of the theater. So that was kind of nice to see. The setting was quite nice. The acting was pretty well done as well. I have no complaints on the acting. I think Jay Baruchel gives a stock performance that he normally gives in this show. And I think the woman who played Hermione, the older woman from the cold open, even the guy who plays the ghost man that wants to reprise his role as Macbeth, he was pretty good. But the show stealer here was Catherine Long. Catherine Long is kind of one of those actors that she never does anything wrong that she's in. And here she was just electric. Every scene she was in, I was just enamored with watching it. And now that I'm mentioning it, I am skipping over a scene that happened that caused some tension because it's kind of dumb and not really important. But there's a scene, you know, even though she's a good actor, right? There is a scene where, you know, Jay Baruchel's on the stage with her, and there's like dripping blood from, I guess, the same location where the sword fell from the cold open. And she's like, "You poured blood in my hand." Like, kind of some disbelief, you know, you got to put there with some stuff where in some arguments they have script wise. But even those moments don't really weigh down the story all that much. It's just something dumb that's in it. But yeah, she did a great performance. And I guess I'll say this. I mean, it does, for Are You Afraid of the Dark standards, it does have its moments to it that are kind of creepy. Like, I dig the cauldron scene that Jay Baruchel found himself in after he talked with Hermione about, you know, the superstitions of the Macbeth play and all that. I thought that was kind of cool. And I thought the cold open with the sword was really cool as well. So there were some scenes in here that got to me a little bit. Nothing too big or anything, but they are there. And I could definitely see this one being creepy to a younger audience. You know, I'm an adult watching this, but I can definitely see like a 6 to 8 year old being creeped out by this. So kudos. However, there are some negatives that put it down into the average territory for me. The first one is there's just not a lot to this story. At first, you kind of think that there's a mystery of like who this ghost is, who's haunting this. But at the midpoint of the story, this is kind of a second negative added on to it. It becomes anticlimactic once that plot reveal happens about the ghost man and Hermione being his wife or something. That just kills the rest of the story because you already know who the villains are. You're just waiting for something to happen. And what happens out of it just feels just fine. It's just the rest of the story from that point loses intrigue. And I don't like stories that do this where you build up to the mid portion and then just let it fizzle. And that's how I feel this episode is in a nutshell. You have this build up to the middle portion, and then the middle portion to the finale feels like it's slogging its way to finish. And yeah, I feel like it kind of hurts this one. That's the biggest detractors adding up there for me for this episode. Another thing that I can't really wrap my head around. All right, so this whole story, right, is setting up the play of Macbeth. But the entire climax takes place in a rehearsal of the play. It doesn't take place in the play itself, as like a sister sister story in this subgenre did in Goosebumps, like Phantom of the Auditorium. You would think that so much emphasis on this Scottish play, this, you know, haunted, cursed play, would matter in the story. But all this stuff ends up happening in a rehearsal, and the stakes with the ghosts just don't really add up for me, right? It's one of those things that is just kind of adds to the previous negatives. It just makes it okay. You know, like, what are we expecting here, right? So yeah, that stuff was kind of underwhelming. Another thing that really is unexplained in the episode, and this is not the biggest thing ever, but it just doesn't make sense why this character is in the story. And that is the character of Hermione. Hermione is the ghost man's wife, right? And on one hand, I can appreciate that there was some attempt to have some emotions come out of her character, you know, dealing with the man and all that. But I don't really feel like the story went out of its way to flesh that stuff out. Once the mid-portion reveal happens, she kind of disappears from the plot until the climax. So we don't get any stakes or any villainous motives here. They're literally kind of just benevolent ghosts that just want to finish the play and move on. And it's fine, but it's not really scary. You know, this is one of those, this probably could have been a DCOM plot thing going on. I mean, you have your ghost element stuff there, and you do have some scenes that are kind of frightening, but it's really tame. right? And it's kind of depressing. I'm not saying that stories like Phantom of the Auditorium are groundbreaking and, ultra violent or anything, but those stories have like a fun mystery and twists and turns to have. And it builds up to the climax, and you feel like you get the ending, releasing the story, not the midpoint here with this one. So I just don't feel like the story and as a whole here, adding up all these things, hit that very good to great mark, or 4 out of 5 stars or higher for me. This just doesn't have all the qualities there. So I knew it was going to get less than a 4. So now we're at the rating here. To be honest, if I separate Catherine Long and my love for her out of this episode, kind of similar to my thoughts on Lots of Luck from The Haunting Hour, with my love of Brendan Fletcher in that story, this one possibly could get a D tier. But I'm going to give it a C tier because I love Catherine Long. And I think I gave Lots of Luck, I think the same exact score, maybe lower. I can't remember, but I think I gave it a 3.9 out of 5 stars. And that's how I feel about this. I wish I could say more things about it, but there's just not a lot to it, right? It's just Catherine Long steals the show, just like how Brendan Fletcher stole the show and Lots of Luck from The Haunting Hour. Without those performances and without that gravitas taking me to the episode, this one is really forgettable. It's just there in the show. But the fact that this is Catherine Long's like third, kids horror episode, and this is something you can get from her outside of Haunted Mask 1 and 2. As a lifelong fan of hers, I'm going to stand her and prop this up. Like I said, without her being the D tier, probably like a 3.4 out of 5 stars. Nothing too offensive. It's just okay. But the fact that she's in it, I think it makes it good, and a high good for me. Because the performances in here really do save it, I will say. Some people might think I'm being maybe a little too harsh. Some people might think I'm being too lenient on the story. But I had a fun time with it, and I think it's good. I definitely recommend it to you all to go watch. So yeah, that's my thoughts on The Tale of the Walking Shadow. Let me know down in the comment section if you've seen this episode before. Do you love this? Do you hate this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.